All right, today I'm going to talk to you about how to draw ellipses. And ellipses are continuously curved, symmetrical forms. An ellipse is basically a circle seen in perspective. So we have to learn how to properly shape that and how to show ellipses in different viewpoints in relation to an eye level. So when we talk about an ellipse being a symmetrical form, it's symmetrical to both its major axis, which is its horizontal axis, and its vertical axis, which is its minor axis. So we have our minor axis, our major axis, and the ellipse is symmetrical to both. So when we're drawing these, I want to see the construction of the ellipse. So I actually draw out my major and minor axis lines, and I will mark the top and measure that and make sure that the line below my major axis is the same distance. So I'll mark that. And I do that with the left and right of the vertical axis. So I'll mark the side. So this is the end of my ellipse. And I'm going to measure and make sure that it will now be equidistant from my major and minor axis. So when I shape the ellipse, I'm going to hold the pencil the way we've learned. We're going to hold the pencil between our thumb and our forefinger, and the barrel of the pencil goes across our palm so that we can work with a gestural line. And we want to build up the shape of that ellipse in light, very light lines, hitting those ends. And you can see as I draw this, I'm not hitting those ends perfectly, but I gesturally figure out that shape, search out its shape, search out the form, until I see it starting to come together. And once I see that I've got a continuous curve and I'm hitting my ends, I can clean this up now and slowly shape that ellipse and tighten up the contour of that elliptical shape. So that's how we shape an ellipse. We identify our major axis and our minor axis, and we make sure it stays symmetrical, and we use a searching gestural line to feel out the shape of that form. The other thing we have to remember is that the minor axis is always perpendicular to the major axis. So that means it's at a 90-degree angle of the major axis. So when we're drawing an ellipse on its side, let's say we had a wine bottle, some kind of cylinder laying down on the ground, we draw the angle of that form lying on the ground, and then we find our minor axis off of that major axis or central vertical axis, and make sure that it's perpendicular at a 90 degree. So then if I'm identifying the size of this ellipse and marking my ends equidistant and shape this, I'm shaping this around the major and minor axis and keeping it continuously curved and symmetrical. So it would take a little bit of work at this angle, but I'm using that nice gestural searching line to figure out the shape. And then if I was putting in the rest of the bottle, we would see the body of the bottle, another ellipse up here to show us the shoulder, and then we'd get into the neck. But I'm not going to take the time to draw all that out. So what I suggest is that you practice drawing multiple ellipses. I usually have my students draw 25 ellipses with different size minor axis, different size major axis lines, so that you get used to, let's say, tight ellipses. So having to shape out a really tight elliptical form. Again, making sure it stays symmetrical and continuously curved. What we want to avoid is pointy ends. We're not drawing footballs. We're not drawing eyeballs. We're drawing ellipses that are continuously curved. We're not drawing rubber bands that look flat on the ends. Has to be a continuous curve around the top and bottom, and also on the sides. And that's what we're looking for in a properly shaped ellipse. So I suggest that each of you draw 25 to practice shaping them, and then identify on your paper which ones you think look like good ellipses and which ones you think need work. So when we're actually drawing objects that have ellipses in them, I put two forms down here, a solid object, the terracotta pot, and then a clear vase. With the clear vase, we can sometimes see the bottom ellipse. With the solid object, the terracotta pot, we only see half the ellipse, and I'll show you how you figure out this shape of the full ellipse for the bottom. So the very first thing I do is the same as when you were drawing boxes. You're going to get the gestural drawing, the gestural mapping of the object. So I'm going to quickly map out the shape of this terracotta form, and I know that there's going to be things that need to be cleaned up. I just want to get the basic shape and size that I'm going to work on this drawing. So I'm going to say that this is my back, or the back of the top ellipse. So this is this mark, and then I'm going to mark the bottom front of the front ellipse or bottom ellipse, and I'm going to build my central vertical axis. So I'm going to draw that, and again, use the vertical of the edge of your paper to make sure your vertical line stays vertical and doesn't tilt. That'll be very important to the quality of your ellipse. And then I'm going to measure my width compared to my height. So my marks here give me the line that we're making sure everything stays proportional to. So that's the height of the front of the, or the whole object, from the back of the ellipse to the front of the bottom ellipse. So back of the top ellipse, front of the bottom ellipse. And I'm going to measure the width of my top ellipse. So holding my pencil out, closing one eye, and putting my tip of my pencil to this edge of the top, and I'm going to slide my thumb to this edge, and I'm going to measure that compared to my vertical. So doing that, I measure that to the terracotta pot, and it's about 3/4 of the way up. So I'm going to mark that on my drawing, and then I'm going to take that measurement with my pencil, and I'm going to turn that sideways. And that tells me my ellipse needs to be wider than I originally had it. So I'm going to mark that. When I mark that there, I can take that half of the ellipse. So my minor axis from my major axis, I'm using the minor axis here, which is also my central vertical axis line. I'm going to take that measurement, repeat it over on the other side, mark that, and I can draw that in. And so now I know what the size of my front ellipse should be, and I've made sure that it's symmetrical, equidistant from my central vertical axis on left and right. So I'm going to shape that ellipse. I'm going to gesturally draw that out and get the shape of that ellipse. And once I feel like I've got a good ellipse forming, I'm going to now look at my sides, and then I'll get to my bottom ellipse. So the sides, I'm going to measure the angle of those compared to a vertical line or a plumb line. So I can hold my pencil out vertically from the top ellipse. So I'll actually hold the pencil at this edge down and see the angle that's created from the vertical line and the angle of the side of the pot. And then I want to recreate that in my drawing. So I can draw vertical here next to parallel to my central vertical axis line, and draw my angle in relation to that. So I can look at the angle of that pot, and I want to double check, make sure I'm not overdoing the angle. Do the same with the other side, and they have to stay symmetrical. So I can also make sure I'm staying equidistant from my vertical axis line, and I am. And now I want to put in my next ellipse that I see, the next major ellipse for the form, and that's going to be this top ellipse for the lip of the terracotta pot. So I'm going to measure down from the top ellipse, the front of the top ellipse, to where it meets the ring of the lip of the pot, and then I'm going to compare that to my vertical. So I'm measuring, holding my pencil tip here, slide my thumb down till it meets here, and I'm going to measure that against the full vertical. And it's a little bit above halfway. So if I mark that there, I then take this measurement, I bring that down from the front of my top ellipse down to here, and that should be where that lip is, but I'm going to double check that just to be sure. that sometimes our measurements aren't always accurate. And I'm going to move it down a little bit. So I'm going to redo that measurement. And that brings us down to here. So I'm going to say that this is where the front of that ellipse is. And to figure out the shape of that ellipse, there are a couple of things that I need to keep in mind. I can look at where the sides meet the ellipse, and I can see half of the ellipse, and I can draw that half in. So I can see where those sides intersect the side. So this is the bottom of it. I can see where the sides intersect. And I can draw a horizontal, and that lets me see half of an ellipse. I can hold my pencil across from each side where they're meeting the edges. So where the sides meet the ellipse, I can hold my pencil across that, and it lets me see the bottom curve of that ellipse and the height of that. And so that does look about the height that I'm thinking. So I'm going to draw that in, and then I can take that from that where the ellipse, or excuse me, where the major axis intersects my central vertical axis line. I'll take that measurement from there to where I've measured the ring of that ellipse being, and I'm going to repeat that above. So now I've got the height of my ellipse, and I know the width of my ellipse, and so I can shape that out. And remember, symmetrical, continuously curved. So that gives me the ellipse for the ring, or the lip of the form. Now that lip is wider than the rest of the object, so I'm going to take that out from the side that I've drawn. I'm going to bring that out a little bit more. But where that meets, where this edge of the ring or lip meets the side, I want to still draw my ellipse going back. So that's why we draw transparently and we shape out the full ellipse. I don't want this to come and meet at a point. I want it to continue around, so the front or the side of the form would curve into that. So we're going to draw that curving line of the ellipse. So now I want the bottom. So now I can just measure the distance from the top of this lip. I can measure this distance to this and compare that to the top of the terracotta pot. So I'm going to take that measurement from here to here, and I'm going to compare that to my vertical starting at the back point. And it comes below that hole that's in the top. It's a little less than half, or a little more than half. And that actually brings us to where the bottom is, where I originally said my bottom was, so I did something right. Now I need to find my major axis line for this side. So again, holding my pencil across where the sides meet the floor now. So right where they meet the floor, if I hold my pencil across that, I can see the shape of half of the ellipse. And it's going to have a little bit more of a curve, so I'm going to start it here, than the ellipse above it. So one thing we have to keep in mind is that so I'm going to draw a horizontal across here, repeat that. So here's the full size of my ellipse that I need to shape out. But as we move up from up towards our eye level, your ellipses become more foreshortened. So the ellipses that are at the bottom of our object are going to be more curved, and the ellipses that are up to the top become less curved or more foreshortened. So if we have an ellipse that's at our eye level, we actually just see a straight line. So this curve this curve of this ellipse needs to be slightly more curvy than the one above it. So I'm going to shape that out and make sure I'm paying attention to its symmetry, the symmetrical quality of it. I was going to say symmetricality, but I don't know if that's a word. So So now I can clean up this drawing, darken my lines, and hopefully when I do all that, I would see that we've drawn the terracotta pot that's in front of us. But I'm not going to take you through cleaning all this up. It'll take a little bit too much time. So that should look like the terracotta pot that I'm drawing. If I was doing this for a full drawing, I would actually draw these other rings in and draw them as full ellipses. So I would find the ellipse for each one. So if this ends up in a still life you students are drawing, you should draw out each of those and make sure you're paying attention to how ellipses relate to each other as they move up towards your eye level or down away from your eye level. And when you're drawing multiple objects, you'll want to see how, say, an object over here, the ellipses in that object relate to the ellipses of an object on the same level. So you're constantly comparing the ellipses to the ellipses of each object to each other in the whole of the drawing.